Welcome to Story Loop, the ultimate destination for captivating tales and timeless stories. From fascinating myths and legends to inspiring true stories and imaginative narratives, we bring you a loop of unforgettable journeys that spark curiosity and ignite your imagination. Whether you're here to relax, reflect, or get inspired, Story Loop is your haven for storytelling magic. Hit subscribe and join the loop today, because every story deserves to be heard. Where the shadows whisper and the night comes alive with fear. Here, every tale drips with dread, every word lures you deeper, and every twist will leave you breathless. Are you brave enough to listen? Turn down the lights, and let the darkness tell its story. Today's story, Shadows of the Forgotten. Chapter 1, The Ominous Beginning. A cold wind howled through the dense forest, whispering secrets to the gnarled trees. In the heart of Blackthorn Woods, an ancient mansion stood, cloaked in shadows and forgotten by time. Few dared to venture near, for it was said to be cursed, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred. Amelia Hawthorne, a young journalist with a penchant for mystery, tightened her scarf against the chill as she approached the mansion. She had heard the rumors, the whispered tales of disappearances and ghostly apparitions. But Amelia was not one to be swayed by superstition. Armed with her notebook and camera, she was determined to uncover the truth. The wrought iron gate creaked open under her touch, its rusted hinges screeching a protest. Beyond it, the overgrown garden seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if the forest itself sought to keep intruders away. Amelia hesitated for a moment, her breath visible in the frigid air. Just a story, she muttered to herself. That's all this is. But as she crossed the threshold, a deep sense of unease settled over her. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming shapes that vanished when she blinked. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows like empty eyes staring into her soul. Inside, the air was even colder, carrying the faint scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, and the floorboards groaned under her weight. Every creak and whisper seemed amplified, echoing through the cavernous space. She made her way to the grand staircase, her footsteps leaving faint impressions in the thick layer of dust. A faint melody drifted through the air, the haunting notes of a piano. Amelia froze, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from the parlor, a room she had yet to explore. Gathering her courage, she pushed open the heavy oak door. The piano stood in the corner, its keys moving as if guided by invisible hands. The melody was mournful, filled with sorrow and longing. And then it stopped, abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. "Hello?" Amelia called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone here?" The only response was the creak of the floorboards behind her. Spinning around, she found nothing but emptiness. Yet she could feel it, a presence watching her, unseen but palpable. Chapter 2, The Whispering Walls. The parlor walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly as if alive. Amelia pressed her hand against the faded wallpaper, feeling an almost imperceptible pulse beneath her fingertips. She quickly withdrew her hand, her skin crawling with unease. A whisper, faint and indistinct, broke the silence. It sounded like a dozen voices speaking at once, their words overlapping into a chaotic murmur. Amelia strained to make sense of it, but the whispers dissolved into an eerie hush as soon as she focused on them. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself, clutching her camera tightly. Her rational mind screamed that it was all in her head, but her instincts told her otherwise. As she turned to leave the parlor, a sudden crash echoed through the mansion. The sound came from upstairs, where the shadows seemed thicker, darker. Against her better judgment, Amelia decided to investigate. The story she sought wasn't going to reveal itself if she ran away now. Ascending the grand staircase, she felt the air grow colder with each step. The ornate banister was icy to the touch, and the faint scent of decay grew stronger. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before her, its doors closed and uninviting. "Is anyone here?" she called out again, her voice shaky. The only answer was the groan of the mansion settling into its ancient bones. She chose the nearest door and turned the knob. The door swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing a bedroom frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture stood as it had for decades, and cobwebs draped the corners like ghostly curtains. A broken mirror on the dresser reflected the room in fractured shards. As Amelia stepped inside, the whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, encircling her. She spun around, her flashlight beam darting across the room, but she saw nothing. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through her as she fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew into a deafening cacophony, and amidst them, a single voice emerged, clear, chilling, and full of malice. "You shouldn't have come here." Amelia froze, her breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The mirror's broken shards began to vibrate, their edges catching the faint light. One by one, they lifted off the dresser and hovered in the air. Amelia pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. The shards flew toward her, stopping mere inches from her face, reflecting her terrified expression. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The mirror shards fell to the floor with a soft clink, and the whispers ceased. The door creaked open on its own, revealing the dim hallway beyond. Amelia didn't wait to question her luck. She bolted from the room, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. But as she reached the top of the staircase, she heard it again, a faint melody, the mournful tune of the piano, calling her back. Chapter 3: The Keeper's Warning. The piano's melody beckoned her, each note resonating deep within her chest. It was hauntingly beautiful yet filled with an unmistakable dread. Amelia hesitated at the top of the staircase, her fingers gripping the banister. She couldn't explain it, but the music felt alive, as though it sought to pull her into its sinister rhythm. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "Not again." But her legs moved of their own accord, guiding her back down the grand staircase. Each step creaked louder than the last, as if the mansion itself protested her descent. When she reached the bottom, the parlor door was ajar, the faint glow of candlelight flickering within. Amelia pushed the door open, her heart pounding. The piano stood silent now, its keys still. But the room was no longer empty. A figure sat in the corner, shrouded in shadow. Its outline was humanoid, yet its form flickered like a dying flame. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "The mansion does not forgive intruders." Amelia swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure leaned forward, revealing a face half concealed by darkness. Its features were unnervingly sharp, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "I am the keeper," it said. "The one who ensures the forgotten remain undisturbed." Amelia took a step back, clutching her camera like a talisman. "I just wanted to uncover the truth. I didn't mean any harm." The keeper's laugh was a hollow, echoing sound. "Truth? The truth is a curse in this place. Leave while you still can, or you will join the others." A chill ran down her spine. "The others?" The keeper gestured toward the piano. Its lid creaked open, and Amelia saw them, faint, spectral figures trapped within the strings. Their faces were twisted in anguish, their mouths open in silent screams. "They came seeking answers," the keeper said, "and now they are part of the song." Amelia's breath caught. She turned and fled the parlor, her footsteps pounding against the floorboards. As she ran, the walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, chasing her through the mansion. She reached the front door and yanked it open, stumbling into the night. The cold air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop running until the mansion was far behind, its dark silhouette barely visible through the trees. For a moment, she thought she was safe. But then she heard it, the faint melody of the piano, drifting through the forest, a chilling reminder that the mansion had not let her go. Chapter 4: The Veiled Passage. Amelia didn't stop running until she reached her car, the cold metal of the door handle grounding her in reality. Her trembling hands struggled to find the keys, but as soon as she managed to start the engine, the car's radio blared to life. Instead of static or music, the piano's mournful melody filled the vehicle, as though the mansion had reached out to claim her even here. "Not again," she screamed, frantically turning the radio off. Yet the music persisted, growing louder, as if the car itself had become part of the mansion's haunted symphony. She threw the car into gear, her tires spinning in the dirt before finding traction. As the vehicle sped down the forest road, the headlights illuminated figures standing among the trees, pale, motionless forms that seemed to watch her escape. Some held faint lanterns, their flickering light casting eerie shadows across their featureless faces. Amelia's heart raced as the road twisted and turned, her fear mounting with every glance in the rearview mirror. The figures were not standing still anymore, they were following her, their movements unnaturally fast and jerky. They flickered in and out of sight, appearing closer each time she blinked. The road suddenly narrowed, and the trees on either side seemed to close in. Her headlights caught a break in the forest, a side path barely wide enough for her car. Desperate to lose her pursuers, she veered off the main road and onto the unmarked trail. The path twisted sharply, and the underbrush scraped against the sides of her car like claws. The figures disappeared from her rearview mirror, but the oppressive feeling of being watched remained. The trail ended abruptly in a clearing where an old, ivy-covered well stood at its center. The car engine sputtered and died, leaving her in complete silence except for the faint rustle of leaves. Amelia stepped out, her knees trembling as she approached the well. Something about it felt ancient and malevolent, as though it had been waiting for her. She peered into its depths, her flashlight beam barely penetrating the darkness. The faint melody of the piano echoed up from the well, distorted and hollow, as if played underwater. A chill crept up her spine as a voice whispered from the darkness below. "Join us, Amelia." Chapter 5: The Depths of Deception. Amelia froze, the whispered call from the well echoing in her mind. Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams over the surrounding clearing. She felt the weight of unseen eyes on her back and the undeniable pull of the voice. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice faltering. The well responded with silence, but the air around her thickened with anticipation. She stepped back, her instincts screaming to run, yet her curiosity anchored her feet. A faint glow emanated from the depths of the well, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. She turned to leave, but the forest had transformed. The trees now loomed impossibly tall, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The path she had driven down was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of roots and shadows. A guttural growl reverberated from behind her. Spinning around, she saw a figure climbing out of the well. Its movements were unnatural, each limb jerking as if controlled by invisible strings. The figure's face was obscured by a veil of black mist, but its eyes, two glowing orbs, bore into her soul. "You cannot leave," the figure rasped, its voice layered with the echoes of countless others. "The forest claims those who awaken the song." Amelia stumbled backward, clutching her camera as if it could protect her. "I don't want any part of this," she cried. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "But you already are." Before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The roots of the surrounding trees writhed like serpents, weaving together to form a jagged staircase descending into the well. The melody grew louder, each note pressing against her chest like a physical force. She backed away, but the forest closed in, the trees forming an impenetrable wall. Her breath quickened as she realized there was no escape. The well's glow intensified, illuminating the staircase that now seemed to beckon her. "Descend," the figure commanded, its voice leaving no room for defiance. Amelia hesitated, tears streaming down her face. She didn't want to go, but the weight of the melody and the oppressive presence of the figure left her no choice. With trembling steps, she began her descent. Chapter 6: The Forgotten Choir. The staircase spiraled downward, each step resonating with a hollow echo. The walls of the well were slick with an unidentifiable substance that shimmered faintly in the eerie glow. The melody grew louder, and with it came the whispers, voices overlapping in a chaotic harmony. "Why are you here? Save us. You cannot escape." Amelia clutched her head, the cacophony threatening to shatter her mind. She wanted to turn back, but the staircase had vanished behind her, replaced by solid stone. The only way was forward. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a cavern. The walls were lined with ancient carvings depicting figures trapped in twisted poses of agony. At the center of the cavern stood a massive organ, its pipes stretching impossibly high into the darkness above. The keys moved on their own, playing the haunting melody that had plagued her since she entered the mansion. Behind the organ stood the keeper, its form now fully revealed. Its body was a patchwork of shadows and flesh, and its glowing eyes were joined by a sinister grin. Around it, spectral figures floated, their translucent forms writhing in silent torment. "Welcome," the keeper said, spreading its arms. "You have reached the heart of the song." Amelia stumbled forward, her knees buckling under the weight of the keeper's gaze. "Why me?" she managed to choke out. The keeper laughed, a sound that echoed endlessly in the cavern. "The song chooses its players. You sought the truth, and now you must pay the price." The spectral figures began to swirl around her, their faces contorted in sorrow. Amelia's mind raced as she realized the truth. These were the souls of those who had come before her, trapped in eternal servitude to the melody. "No," she whispered. "I won't become one of you." The keeper's grin widened. "You have no choice." Chapter 7: The Last Note. Desperation fueled Amelia as she scanned the cavern for an escape. Her eyes landed on the organ. The melody was coming from it, but perhaps it could be stopped. She bolted toward the organ, dodging the grasping hands of the spectral figures. The keeper roared in anger, its form stretching and twisting as it tried to block her path. Reaching the organ, Amelia slammed her hands onto the keys, disrupting the melody with a discordant crash. The cavern trembled, and the spectral figures shrieked, their forms flickering like dying flames. "You cannot break the song," the keeper bellowed, advancing on her. Amelia's gaze fell on a single key that seemed to pulse with a different light. She instinctively knew it was the source of the melody, the heart of the curse. Without hesitation, she pressed it. A blinding light filled the cavern, and a deafening silence followed. The spectral figures vanished, and the keeper let out a final, anguished cry before disintegrating into shadows. When the light faded, Amelia found herself back in the forest, standing by the well. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. She looked down at her hands, which still clutched her camera. She turned and walked away, vowing never to speak of what she had experienced. But as she reached her car, she heard it, a faint, mournful melody drifting through the trees. The song was not finished. Chapter 8: The Enveloped Crossing. Amelia again in the same situation. The previous things keep happening again with her. She threw the car into gear, her tires spinning in the dirt before finding traction. As the vehicle sped down the forest road, the headlights illuminated figures standing among the trees, pale, motionless forms that seemed to watch her escape. Some held faint lanterns, their flickering light casting eerie shadows across their featureless faces. Amelia's heart raced as the road twisted and turned, her fear mounting with every glance in the rearview mirror. The figures were not standing still anymore, they were following her, their movements unnaturally fast and jerky. They flickered in and out of sight, appearing closer each time she blinked. The piano music faded as she drove deeper into the woods, replaced by an oppressive silence. Amelia slowed the car, her instincts warning her of something unseen. The path ended abruptly, revealing a clearing dominated by a stone archway covered in twisting vines. It was ancient, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Amelia stepped out of the car, drawn to the archway despite her fear. The air around it felt charged, humming with an energy that made her skin tingle. She raised her camera and took a photograph. The flash illuminated the clearing for a split second, revealing faint outlines of figures standing just beyond the archway, shadows that seemed to ripple and twist as if alive. Amelia staggered back, her camera trembling in her hands. The figures beyond the archway were not like the others she had seen. They were taller, more imposing, their forms shrouded in flowing, smoke-like veils that seemed to blend into the night. A voice echoed from the archway, low and resonant, carrying a weight of ancient authority. "You have crossed into the veiled passage. The line between the living and the forgotten grows thin here." Amelia's voice faltered as she tried to respond, her throat dry with fear. What is this place? Who are you?" The figures beyond the archway shifted, their movements slow and deliberate. One stepped forward, the veil surrounding it parting just enough to reveal hollow, glowing eyes. "We are the Watchers," it intoned. "Guardians of the threshold. None may enter the passage without paying the price." "What price?" Amelia whispered, clutching her camera as if it could somehow protect her. The Watcher extended a hand, skeletal fingers stretching toward her. "A fragment of yourself. A memory, a moment, a piece of your soul. Only then may you see what lies beyond." Amelia felt an inexplicable pull, a deep yearning to step through the archway despite the ominous warning. But the memory of the mansion, the keeper, and the trapped souls tethered her to reason. She shook her head. "I don't want to enter. I just want to leave." The Watcher's glowing eyes narrowed, and the others began to close in, their veils swirling faster. "You cannot turn back now. You are marked, drawn to the shadows as they are drawn to you. The longer you resist, the stronger the pull will become." Panic gripped her as the air around her grew heavy, pressing against her like an invisible force. She stumbled back toward the car, but her path was blocked by the figures she had seen in the forest, motionless, faceless, their lanterns dimly flickering. "No!" Amelia screamed, spinning back toward the archway. The Watchers were closer now, their presence overwhelming. In desperation, she raised her camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit up the clearing again, and for a brief moment, the figures recoiled, their veils flaring like flames in a gust of wind. Seizing the opportunity, she bolted toward her car, weaving through the motionless figures that blocked her path. She threw herself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, her fingers fumbling to turn the key. The engine roared to life, and she reversed sharply, the tires skidding on the uneven ground. The faceless figures didn't move, but their lanterns flared brighter, their light piercing through the car's windows. Amelia floored the accelerator, the car lurching forward onto the narrow path. The ancient archway and its spectral guardians faded into the distance, but the sense of being watched never left her. As she sped through the forest, the faint melody of the piano returned, weaving through the air like a haunting lullaby. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the woods, the dark silhouette of the mansion barely visible in her rearview mirror. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, she thought she had escaped. But when she glanced down, her blood ran cold. The runes from the archway were etched into the back of her hand, glowing faintly like embers. Amelia realized with chilling certainty that her connection to the mansion, and its secrets, was far from severed. Ethereal shapes that dissolved into the darkness as quickly as they appeared. Amelia lowered the camera, her breath hitching. The figures beyond the archway seemed different, taller, cloaked in flowing shadows that pulsed like smoke. She inched closer, her curiosity warring with the primal instinct to run. The runes on the archway glowed brighter, their light casting strange, shifting patterns on the ground. A low hum resonated in the air, growing louder as she approached. "Amelia," a voice whispered, soft but undeniable. It came from beyond the archway, calling her name as though it had been waiting for her. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking. She scanned the clearing, but no one was visible. The air seemed thicker now, harder to breathe. She reached out tentatively to touch the archway's surface. The moment her fingers brushed the stone, the hum erupted into a deafening roar, and the runes flared with blinding light. The archway seemed to come alive, shifting and shimmering as if it were a portal to another world. Amelia stumbled back, shielding her eyes. When she opened them, the clearing had changed. The trees were gone, replaced by an expanse of jagged black rocks and a sky swirling with green and purple hues. The air smelled of sulfur, and the ground felt unstable beneath her feet. She turned to run back to her car, but froze. The archway was still there, but her car was gone. In its place stood a figure cloaked in tattered black robes, its face obscured by a hood. "You have entered the veiled passage," the figure intoned, its voice deep and reverberating. "Few who cross return unchanged." Amelia backed away, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I didn't mean to, this was a mistake. I just want to go back." The figure raised a hand, and the glowing runes on the archway dimmed. "The path back requires a toll." "What toll?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure's hood shifted slightly, as if it were smiling beneath the shadows. "A memory, a truth, a piece of yourself. Choose wisely, for the choice cannot be undone." Amelia's mind raced. The portal, the figures, the haunting melody, it all felt like a waking nightmare. But the alternative was unthinkable. She couldn't stay here, in this strange, otherworldly void. "Take a memory," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just let me go back." The figure nodded and extended its hand. A cold wind swirled around her, and Amelia felt a sharp tug deep within her mind, as though something was being wrenched away. A memory surfaced, a moment with her late father, laughing as they played in the garden, and then it was gone, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The runes on the archway flared to life once more, and the figure stepped aside. "The way is open. But beware, mortal, what you've lost will find you again." Amelia didn't wait for further explanation. She ran through the archway, the strange world dissolving into darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the forest, the mansion looming in the distance. But something was different. The air felt heavier, and the shadows seemed to cling to her like a second skin. She glanced at her reflection in the car's window and gasped. Her eyes, once bright and curious, were now tinged with a faint, unnatural glow. The mansion had marked her, and the veiled passage had taken its toll. Whatever awaited her next would not let her go so easily. Ethereal shapes that dissolved back into darkness as quickly as the flash faded. Amelia lowered the camera, her breath catching in her throat. These figures were different, taller, more imposing, their forms cloaked in shadowy tendrils that shifted as though alive. The runes on the archway flared brighter, their glow pulsating in rhythm with a deep, resonating hum. Amelia stumbled backward, instinctively raising her camera again, but a low voice stopped her. "Do not disturb the balance," it warned, cold and otherworldly. The sound vibrated through her chest, as though the speaker were both near and impossibly far away. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" The air within the archway shimmered, and a figure emerged, a towering silhouette cloaked in flowing black. Its face was obscured, but two piercing lights burned where its eyes should have been. "This is the veiled passage," it said, the words reverberating in her mind rather than her ears. "A threshold between worlds. You, mortal, stand where few are meant to tread." "I didn't mean to come here," Amelia stammered, her fingers tightening on her camera. "I just—" "You are marked," the figure interrupted, raising a hand. A chill ran through her as she noticed the faintly glowing runes on her skin, the same symbols etched into the archway. The mansion called to you, and now you are bound to its will. Amelia's heart raced as she stumbled back toward her car. No. I don't want this. I just want to leave. The figure tilted its head, as though considering her plea. The passage does not release its chosen so easily. If you wish to return to your world, you must sever the bond. How? She asked, desperation lacing her voice. The figure gestured toward the archway. Pass through and retrieve what was lost. Only then can the mark be removed. Amelia hesitated, the weight of the choice pressing down on her. The shadows beyond the archway seemed to ripple with malice, but the alternative, remaining bound to the mansion's dark pull, felt equally terrifying. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the archway. As she crossed the threshold, the world around her warped and shifted. The forest vanished, replaced by a desolate landscape of jagged rocks and a swirling, blood-red sky. The air was thick and heavy, filled with an eerie, keening wind. Amelia turned, but the archway was gone. In its place stood a narrow path leading to a towering, crumbling structure in the distance. She could feel it pulling her forward, a force as intangible as it was irresistible. Retrieve what was lost, she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the wind. What does that even mean? As she moved forward, the shadows around her seemed to come alive, forming shapes that whispered her name. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they coalesced into a single, haunting voice, the same voice she had heard in the mansion. You cannot escape, it said, dripping with malice. You are ours. Amelia pressed on, ignoring the voice, but her steps faltered as she approached the structure. It was a twisted version of the mansion she had fled, its windows glowing with a sickly green light. The piano's mournful melody drifted from within, faint but unmistakable. She pushed open the heavy door, her heart pounding. Inside, the air was suffused with a palpable darkness, and the walls pulsed with the same eerie glow as the runes on her skin. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small, glass orb. Within the orb, shadows swirled like smoke, and Amelia felt an inexplicable connection to it. This was what she had lost, her fragment of memory, of self. As she reached for the orb, the shadows around her converged, taking shape as spectral figures with hollow, glowing eyes. They moved closer, their presence suffocating. You cannot take it back, one hissed. It belongs to the passage now. Amelia's hand hovered over the orb, her mind racing. If she hesitated any longer, she knew she would be trapped here forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, she grabbed the orb and clutched it to her chest. The room erupted in a cacophony of screams as the shadows writhed and twisted, their forms dissolving into the air. The glow from the orb intensified, enveloping Amelia in a blinding light. She felt herself being pulled backward, her body weightless and her mind filled with the haunting melody of the piano. When the light faded, she was lying on the forest floor, the cold night air biting at her skin. The archway loomed above her, its runes dim and lifeless. She glanced down at her hands, the markings were gone. Amelia staggered to her feet, her heart pounding as she stumbled back to her car. As she drove away, the mansion's silhouette disappeared into the darkness, but the faint strains of the piano followed her, a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Chapter 9, Echoes of the Passage. Amelia lowered the camera, her pulse hammering in her ears. The flash had revealed more than she had anticipated, dozens of figures, their shapes wreathed in shadows, standing just beyond the archway. They were silent, unmoving, their presence suffocating. Her instincts screamed for her to turn back, to flee into the safety of the car. Yet something about the archway compelled her to stay. The glowing runes seemed to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat, beckoning her forward. One of the shadowed figures stepped closer, its outline sharpening. It wasn't fully human, its limbs were elongated, and its face was a blank void. When it spoke, its voice was layered, as though 1,000 whispers converged into one. "Amelia Hawthorne," it intoned, the sound resonating through her very bones. "You stand at the veiled passage. Here, all debts are paid, all secrets revealed." "I don't owe anything," Amelia stammered, her voice trembling. "I just want to leave." The figure tilted its head, as if amused. "All who cross the mansion's threshold owe a debt. You have taken something, though you may not remember." Amelia clutched her camera, its weight grounding her. "What did I take?" Another figure emerged from the shadows, this one smaller, hunched. It held an object in its spindly hands, a locket, its silver surface tarnished with age. The sight of it sent a jolt of recognition through her. She had seen the locket before, in a dream, or a memory long buried. "You stole time," the second figure hissed, its voice sharp and accusing. "Moments lost, fractured by your presence." Amelia shook her head, backing away. "That doesn't make any sense. I didn't steal anything." The figures began to close in, their forms shifting and flickering like smoke caught in a breeze. The runes on the archway blazed brighter, illuminating the clearing in an eerie, otherworldly light. "You must return what was taken," the first figure said, its voice echoing. "Enter the passage and restore the balance, or be consumed by the shadows." Amelia's gaze darted to the archway. Beyond its glowing frame, the world seemed to ripple, as though it were a reflection on disturbed water. Her fear warred with a deep-seated curiosity. The journalist in her demanded answers, even as her survival instincts screamed to run. "How do I restore it?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Step through," the figure commanded, gesturing toward the archway. "Face what lies beyond." The air grew colder as Amelia approached the archway, her every step weighed down by the oppressive presence of the figures surrounding her. She hesitated at the threshold, her breath visible in the icy air. "Once you enter," the second figure warned, "there is no turning back." Amelia glanced behind her. The clearing was empty now, save for the silent witnesses encircling her. The car, the road, even the trees seemed distant, as though they existed in another world. With a deep breath, she stepped through the archway. The world shifted violently. The ground beneath her feet vanished, replaced by a swirling abyss of colors and shadows. Amelia felt weightless, untethered, as if she were falling and floating all at once. Whispers filled her ears, fragments of conversations she didn't recognize but felt intimately familiar. When the chaos subsided, she found herself standing in a dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting a version of herself, some younger, others older, but all staring back with the same haunted expression. Ahead, the corridor split into 3 paths, each leading into darkness. Above the center path, a glowing symbol hovered, a rune identical to the one she had seen etched into the archway. "You must choose," a voice echoed, low and resonant. "Each path holds a piece of what was lost. Only by reclaiming them can you hope to return." Amelia swallowed hard, her reflection multiplying infinitely in the mirrors. The weight of her choice pressed down on her, but there was no time to hesitate. She stepped forward, choosing the center path. Chapter 10: The Mirror of Remnants. The corridor Amelia had chosen led her into an immense, domed chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The room was lined with more mirrors, each reflecting fragments of her life. But these reflections were not static. They moved, replaying moments she had long forgotten, childhood memories, fleeting joys, and profound sorrows. In the center of the room stood an ornate mirror unlike the others. Its frame was gilded, intricate carvings of vines and thorns twisting together. Its surface shimmered as though alive, rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. Amelia approached cautiously, the silence pressing in around her. As she stood before the mirror, its surface shifted, revealing a scene that wasn't a memory, it was something else entirely. A child sat alone in a dimly lit room, clutching a silver locket. The child's face was familiar, yet distorted, as though viewed through cracked glass. "Who are you?" Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. The child looked up, their gaze meeting hers through the mirror. "I'm what you left behind," they said, their voice soft but filled with accusation. "The pieces you forgot when you chose to forget." "I don't understand," Amelia said, stepping closer. "What did I forget?" The child extended the locket toward her. As Amelia reached out to take it, the mirror's surface rippled violently, and the child's face twisted into a mask of anguish. Shadows erupted from the frame, swirling around her like a living storm. "Restore the locket," a voice boomed, the same layered tone as the figures from the clearing. Only then can the echoes be silenced. Amelia staggered back, clutching her head as the shadows engulfed her. The room dissolved into darkness, and when the shadows receded, she found herself standing in another corridor, the locket now clutched in her hand. It was heavier than it looked, its surface cold and etched with the same glowing runes as the archway. A sense of familiarity washed over her, and she realized she had seen the locket before, not in a memory, but in a recurring dream she could never quite recall upon waking. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths. One was bathed in a faint golden light, warm and inviting. The other was cloaked in darkness, its depths impenetrable. The locket in her hand seemed to pulse, pulling her toward the dark path. "Of course," Amelia muttered, her fear mingling with grim determination. She tightened her grip on the locket and stepped into the shadows. The air grew colder with each step, the silence broken only by the faint sound of her own breathing. The path led to a cavernous hall where a massive stone pedestal stood, its surface carved with intricate patterns. The runes on the locket glowed brighter as she approached, their light reflecting off the pedestal's polished surface. Amelia placed the locket in the center of the pedestal. The runes flared to life, and the hall was filled with a deafening hum. Shadows began to coalesce around her, forming the figures she had seen before. Their outlines sharpened, and their faces became clearer, faces she recognized. "You," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're the ones from the mansion." "We are the forgotten," one of them said, their voice a mournful echo. "Bound to this place by what was taken." "What happens if I restore the locket?" she asked, her voice shaking. "The balance will be restored," another figure replied. "But a price must be paid. Nothing in the passage is without cost." Amelia's mind raced. She had come seeking answers, but the truth was more complex than she had ever imagined. She looked at the locket, its glow now almost blinding. "What's the price?" she asked. The figures did not answer. Instead, the locket began to emit a soft melody, a haunting, familiar tune that sent chills down her spine. It was the piano song from the mansion, the one that had lured her into the parlor. As the melody played, the runes on the pedestal began to shift, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. The air around her grew heavier, and the shadows began to merge, forming a single towering figure. "You must decide," the figure said, its voice a deep, resonant boom. "Restore the balance and leave, or abandon the locket and remain. Choose wisely, for the passage allows no second chances." Amelia's heart pounded. She didn't know what the cost would be, but she couldn't leave the locket behind, not when so many were trapped because of it. Summoning all her courage, she placed her hands on the pedestal and whispered, "I'll restore it." The runes flared one final time, and the locket dissolved into light, its energy spreading throughout the hall. The shadows began to fade, and the figures vanished, their expressions of sorrow replaced by peace. The towering figure loomed over her, its form dissolving into the air. "You have chosen well, Amelia Hawthorne. But the passage does not let its visitors go unchanged." Before she could ask what that meant, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she fell into darkness. Amelia awoke in the clearing, the morning sun filtering through the trees. The mansion was gone, replaced by an overgrown field. Her car sat nearby, its engine idling as though waiting for her. She sat up, her head spinning. In her hand was the locket, its runes now dormant. As she stared at it, a single, faint whisper echoed in her mind. "Remember." Amelia pocketed the locket and climbed into the car. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the passage hadn't released her entirely. In the distance, the faint melody of a piano drifted through the air, a haunting reminder of the shadows she had left behind. But this time, she didn't look back. Chapter 11, Reflections of the Past. The mirrors stretched endlessly, their surfaces shimmering like liquid silver. Each reflection seemed to tell a different story. Some showed Amelia as she remembered herself, smiling, determined, full of life. Others revealed twisted versions of her, trapped in moments she didn't recognize, screaming in terror, wandering aimlessly through darkness, or standing motionless as shadows consumed her. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the suffocating silence. As if in response, one of the mirrors rippled, its surface distorting to reveal a figure stepping through. It was her, but not her. The doppelganger's face was pale, her eyes sunken and devoid of emotion. She wore the same clothes, now tattered and stained, and her movements were eerily robotic. "Amelia Hawthorne," the figure said, her voice hollow. "You have ventured where you do not belong." Amelia staggered back, nearly colliding with another mirror. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" "I am the shadow of your choices," the figure replied. "The reflection of paths you could have taken, and the warnings you ignored." The mirrors around her began to ripple in unison, their surfaces shifting to show scenes she couldn't comprehend. Her childhood home engulfed in flames, her friends calling out to her from a void, and the mansion itself crumbling into a dark abyss. "You sought the truth," the doppelganger continued, stepping closer. "But truth is a prison, and now you are bound to it." Amelia's chest tightened as the mirrors began to close in, their surfaces pulsing like beating hearts. She could hear faint voices emanating from them, pleas, cries, and whispers that clawed at her sanity. Desperate, she turned and ran down the corridor, her footsteps echoing endlessly. The mirrors seemed to follow her, their frames twisting and stretching as if alive. She reached a dead end, where a single mirror stood larger than the rest. Its surface was pitch black, swallowing all light. A voice emerged from the darkness, deep and resonant. "Step forward, and face the truth of what you have become." Amelia hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But the whispers behind her grew louder, pushing her toward the abyss. With trembling hands, she reached out and touched the mirror. Chapter 12, The Abyss Within. The mirror's surface rippled like water, pulling her in. Amelia was enveloped in darkness, a void so complete that it seemed to suffocate her. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no light, no sense of time. Then, faint whispers began to swirl around her, growing louder until they formed a single, unified voice. It was her own. "You've always known," the voice said, accusing yet sorrowful. "You sought the mansion not for truth, but for escape. From your fears. From yourself." Images flashed before her eyes, moments she had buried deep within her memory. The arguments with her family. The betrayal of a close friend. The fear of failure that had driven her to take dangerous risks in pursuit of a story. "You ran from the shadows of your past," the voice continued. "But the shadows have always been part of you." Amelia tried to speak, but the void swallowed her words. She felt herself falling, the darkness closing in until it pressed against her skin, her bones, her very soul. Just as she thought she would be consumed entirely, a faint light appeared in the distance. It grew brighter, cutting through the void, until it surrounded her. She landed on solid ground, gasping for air. Chapter 13, The Mansion's Heart. Amelia found herself in a grand hall unlike any she had seen before. The walls were lined with portraits, each depicting faces she didn't recognize but felt she somehow knew. The floor was a mosaic of shattered mirrors, their fragments glinting in the ethereal light. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal, atop which rested an ornate key. It seemed to pulse with a faint, golden light. "The key of passage," a voice said, echoing through the hall. She turned to see the keeper standing at the far end, his form more solid and imposing than before. "This is your final choice, Amelia Hawthorne," he said. "Take the key, and you may leave this place, but only if you accept the truths you have uncovered. Deny them, and you will remain here, another shadow among the forgotten." Amelia stared at the key, her mind racing. She thought of the mansion, the horrors she had faced, and the reflections that had forced her to confront the darkest parts of herself. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, but so did a glimmer of hope. "I won't run anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I'll face whatever comes." She stepped forward and grasped the key. The hall dissolved into a cascade of light, the fragments of mirrors rising into the air and forming a swirling vortex around her. She closed her eyes, bracing for what came next. Chapter 14, The Return. When she opened her eyes, Amelia was standing at the edge of Blackthorn Woods. The mansion was gone, replaced by an empty clearing bathed in sunlight. Her car sat where she had left it, untouched. The air was warm, the oppressive chill of the forest replaced by a sense of peace. She looked down at her hands, expecting to see the key, but it was gone. In its place was her camera, its lens intact despite everything it had endured. Amelia turned and looked back at the clearing. The faint melody of the piano drifted on the breeze, a reminder of the journey she had taken and the truths she had faced. She climbed into her car and drove away, the forest fading into the distance. The mansion was gone, but its shadows would remain with her, a haunting memory, and a lesson she would carry forever. Epilogue: The Forgotten. Months later, Amelia's article on Blackthorn Woods became a sensation, sparking debates about the nature of fear, truth, and the unknown. She never revealed everything she had experienced, choosing instead to let the story speak for itself. But late at night, when the world was quiet, she would sometimes hear it, a faint, mournful melody, echoing from the shadows. And she would wonder if the mansion's song had truly ended, or if it was waiting, patiently, for the next soul to seek its truth. Chapter 15, The Mirror's Deception. The corridor stretched endlessly before Amelia, each step she took echoing as if the mansion itself listened. The mirrors displayed fragmented scenes, a birthday party she had nearly forgotten, an argument with her mother, a moment of triumph when her first article was published. But interspersed with these were haunting images, herself walking alone through a dark forest, her face streaked with tears, and a version of her staring blankly as shadows consumed her. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked aloud, her voice shaky. "You sought answers," a voice echoed from the mirrors, disembodied yet eerily familiar. "Truth lies within, but truth can break." Amelia approached one of the mirrors, her reflection watching her intently. It wasn't her face, it was older, more weathered, and filled with a sadness that made her stomach churn. The reflection mouthed words she couldn't hear, pressing its hands against the glass as if trapped. A sudden sound behind her made her whirl around. The keeper stood at the end of the corridor, his glowing eyes piercing through the dimness. "You've entered the mansion's heart," he said. "Every choice, every regret, every forgotten memory, it all resides here. The mansion feeds on your truths, your fears. Do you have the strength to face them?" Amelia's fists clenched, her fear replaced by defiance. "I'm not afraid of the truth." The keeper laughed, a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Bravery is easy when you don't understand the cost." With a wave of his hand, the mirrors around her began to ripple, their surfaces shifting to reveal more scenes. One showed her standing before a grave, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a bouquet of wilting flowers. Another displayed her sitting in an empty newsroom, her face hollow with despair. Yet another showed her staring into a camera lens, her expression one of forced confidence masking deep insecurity. Amelia turned away, unable to bear the weight of the images. "Enough," she shouted. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you must choose," the keeper replied. "Do you face the truths you've hidden, or do you become part of the mansion, like so many before you?" Chapter 16, The Room of Lost Souls. The mirrors shattered, their fragments swirling around her like a cyclone. When the chaos subsided, Amelia found herself in a circular chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding jars filled with a glowing, bluish light. Curious, she approached one of the jars. Inside, the light swirled like a tiny storm, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She reached out, and as her fingers brushed the glass, a memory flooded her mind. She was 10 years old, hiding under the stairs as her parents argued. The words were sharp, cutting deep even though they weren't meant for her. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving her breathless. "These are the souls of those who came before you," the keeper said, appearing at her side. "Their essence, their memories, their regrets, all trapped here. Do you wish to join them?" Amelia recoiled from the jar. "No. I want to leave." "Then you must confront the mansion's truth," he said, gesturing to a door at the far end of the room. "But be warned, it will not let you go easily." Chapter 17, The Final Confrontation. Amelia pushed open the heavy door, stepping into a grand hall bathed in a sickly green light. At its center stood a towering figure, its form constantly shifting, one moment a faceless shadow, the next a twisted amalgamation of all the reflections she had seen. "I am the mansion," the figure intoned, its voice reverberating through the hall. "I am the keeper of forgotten truths, the devourer of those who cannot face themselves." Amelia stood her ground, gripping her camera tightly. "You don't scare me," she said, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "Then face what you have hidden," the mansion said, its form solidifying into her doppelganger. "Face yourself." The doppelganger lunged at her, its movements erratic and inhuman. Amelia dodged, her heart racing. The room seemed to twist and warp around her, the walls closing in as the doppelganger pursued her relentlessly. In a moment of desperation, Amelia raised her camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit up the room, and for a brief moment, the doppelganger froze, its form flickering. "You are stronger than this," Amelia whispered to herself, finding a spark of courage. She turned to face the doppelganger, raising the camera again. "You're just a reflection. You don't control me." With each flash of the camera, the doppelganger weakened, its form disintegrating into wisps of smoke. The mansion trembled, its walls cracking as light poured through the fissures. The final photo shattered the doppelganger completely. The mansion let out a deafening roar, its walls collapsing into a cascade of light. Amelia shielded her eyes as everything around her dissolved. Chapter 18, A New Dawn. When she opened her eyes, Amelia was lying in the clearing where the mansion had stood. The air was warm, the oppressive chill replaced by the soft chirping of birds. Her camera lay beside her, its lens intact. She sat up, her heart still pounding. The mansion was gone, reduced to nothing but a faint imprint on the earth. She glanced at her camera, scrolling through the photos. The images were strange, blurs of light and shadow, as if the mansion itself had been trying to escape her lens. Amelia stood, taking one last look at the clearing before heading back to her car. As she drove away, she felt a sense of closure, though the faint melody of the piano still lingered in her mind. She knew she would write about her experience, but she also knew that some truths were best left untold. The mansion's shadows had been banished, but they would always remain a part of her, a reminder of the courage it took to face them. Chapter 19, The Haunting Echoes. Weeks after Amelia's escape, she returned to her city, convinced she had left the horrors behind. Life seemed normal, but there were cracks in the facade. At odd moments, while walking down a bustling street, sitting alone at her desk, or drifting off to sleep, she would hear it. The melody. Faint, fleeting, but unmistakable. At first, she dismissed it as her mind playing tricks on her. But then came the dreams. Night after night, she found herself back in the mansion, standing before the organ, her hands poised above the keys. Each time, she woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. One morning, she noticed something strange about her camera. The lens, which had been cracked during her escape, was now pristine. Confused, she scrolled through the photos, only to find images she hadn't taken, grainy, black and white pictures of the well, the organ, and the spectral figures. Her pulse quickened. The camera wasn't just a tool, it was a conduit. Chapter 20, The Curse Spreads. As Amelia tried to rid herself of the camera, throwing it away, smashing it, even burning it, she discovered it always reappeared, pristine and waiting. Worse, the melody began to manifest more frequently, not just for her but for others around her. Friends and colleagues reported hearing strange music or seeing fleeting shadows. One evening, a close friend, Sarah, borrowed the camera for a photography project. Amelia didn't protest, desperate for relief. But days later, Sarah vanished, leaving behind only the camera and a cryptic note. "It won't stop. I'm going to the source." The melody was no longer a private torment. It was claiming others. Chapter 21, Returning to Blackthorn Woods. Determined to end the curse, Amelia returned to the mansion. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought a group of investigators, skeptics, believers, and thrill-seekers drawn by her story. Together, they ventured into the heart of Blackthorn Woods. The mansion greeted them with an ominous silence. The piano's melody had grown faint, almost imperceptible, as if luring them deeper. But the group soon discovered that the curse had evolved. The shadows were no longer confined to the mansion, they roamed freely, attacking with ferocity. One by one, Amelia's companions were picked off, leaving her alone once more. She reached the organ room, where the keeper, reborn, stronger than before, awaited her. "You cannot destroy the song," it hissed. "You can only choose how it ends." Chapter 22, The Final Note. Amelia realized the song was a cycle, one that needed a conductor to continue. The keeper had been a victim once, just like her. But to end the curse, someone had to take its place. She faced an impossible choice: sacrifice herself to save others or let the melody claim countless more lives. With tears streaming down her face, she placed her hands on the keys. As she played the final note, the cavern erupted in light. The shadows dissolved, and the keeper let out a piercing scream before vanishing. Amelia felt herself fading, her essence merging with the organ. When she awoke, she was no longer human. She was the new keeper, bound to the mansion, cursed to guard its secrets. But unlike her predecessor, she vowed to protect others from the melody, ensuring no one else would suffer her fate. Epilogue: The cycle breaks. Years later, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon Blackthorn Woods. Drawn by tales of a cursed mansion, they approached cautiously. Inside, they found the grand organ, silent and covered in dust. But Amelia, now the keeper, watched from the shadows. For the first time in the mansion's cursed history, the melody did not play. The explorers left, their curiosity unfulfilled, and the mansion returned to its slumber. For now, the cycle was broken. But the song still lingered, waiting for the day when someone, driven by greed, curiosity, or despair, would awaken it once more. And so, the tale ends, or does it? Perhaps, the shadows still linger, watching, waiting. If you enjoyed stepping into the darkness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Stay tuned for more stories that will haunt your dreams. Until next time, sleep tight. And remember, the things that go bump in the night might just be listening, too.